and I was now persuaded that I had gotten to a world of bad spirits, and they were going to kill me. Their complexions are too different so much from ours. Their long hair and the language that they spoke, which was very different from any I had ever heard, united to conform me in this belief. When I looked around the ship, I saw a large furnace boiling and a multitude of Black people of every description chained together, every one of their countenance expressing dejection and sorrow. I no longer doubted my fate, and quite overpowered with horror and anguish, I fell motionless on the dock and fainted. When I recovered, I found some Black people about me who had brought me on board. I asked them if I would be eaten by those white men with horrible looks, red faces and long hair. They told me I was not, and one of the crew brought me a small portion of spirituous liquor. But being afraid of him, I would not take it out of his hand. Soon after this, the Blacks who brought me on board went off and left me, abandoned to my despair. I saw myself deprived of all chances returning to my native country, and I even wished for my former slavery in preference to my present situation, which was filled with horrors of every kind.
Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. See, those men are dressed in white. God's gonna trouble the water. Must be the children of the Israelites. God's gonna trouble the water. Children, wade in the water. Wade in the water. Children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water.
It is said, it is said, it is said that Mary shall speak. Mary shall speak. It is said that Mary shall speak.
Mary shall take herself off
Mary
mute.
should speak. It is said that the first slave ship took sail for the West in 1583, and Mary begins to tell the story once again.
It is said that the first slave ship took sail for the West in 1483. Over the next 400 years, it is estimated that 11,863,000 slaves were shipped across the Atlantic, and that the overall death rate during the crossing was 20%. As history becomes uncovered, the numbers are revised. But whatever the number, what cannot be revised is the sheer horror of the crossing. We have eyewitnesses' accounts from captains.
As soon as an assortment of naked slaves were taken aboard the Guineaman, the men were shackled 2 by 2, the right wrist and ankle of one to the left wrist and ankle of another. Then they were sent to the hold. The women who were regarded as fair prey, and the children who were usually allowed to roam during the day, but they spent the night unless they were otherwise detained between the decks in other rooms than the men. All the slaves were forced to sleep without covering on bare wooden floors, which were often constructed of unplaned boards. One wondered to see how these slaves lived. For though their numbers mounted to 600 and 700, by careful management of the ships, it was possible to include much more. Slavers of every nation, Dutch, French, Portuguese, English boasted of their vessels being the best in the trade. The Dutch had special ships built for the trade, very wide, lofty, and airy, betwixt the decks, with gratings and scuttles to let in more air. There were 2 schools of thought, the loose packers and the tight packers. The former argued that by giving the slaves more room, the morality rate was reduced and a better price received for each slave. The tight packers answered that though the loss of life might be greater on each voyage, there were still greater net receipts from a larger cargo. The hold of a slave ship was about 5 feet high, which seemed like a waste of space. So they built a shelf or platform in the middle of it, extending 6 feet from each side of the vessel. When the bottom was completely covered with flesh, another roll was packed on the platform. If the hold was 6 feet, a second platform was added above the first. To enter the slave deck, the doctors, who were only ones to go there, had to take off their shoes to avoid crushing slaves as they had to crawl over them. Every man was allowed a space 6 feet long by 16 inches wide and about 2 feet 7 inches high. Every woman a space 5 feet by 14 inches. Every girl 4 feet 6 inches by 12 inches, and every boy 5 feet by 14 inches. The Brooks, a vessel of 320 tons, by the law of 1788, permitted to carry 454 slaves, carried as much as 609 slaves on one voyage.
If the weather was clear, we were brought on deck at 8 in the morning, men attacked by their leg irons to the great chain that ran along the bulwarks. We were served our first meal of the day, boiled rice, millet, and cornmeal cooked with a few lumps of salt beef. Afterwards, we danced. The sailors would parade around with the cat o' nine tails, making sure we jumped. Some of us would jump until our ankles were bleeding flesh. For those of us with the scurvy, it was useless torture. Music was provided by a slave thumping on a broken drum or an punctured kettle or by an African banjo. We were often told to sing, and we sang, but not for our own amusement. We sang about our fear, our hunger, and our memory of home. While we were up on board on occasion, the whole would be washed out, but washing could not remove the stench. In the afternoon, we were fed our second meal, which was the same as the first, or horse beans. In bad weather, we were never brought up on deck and were fed in the hold, even though the air was so thick and poisonous to breathe. For as often happens, those of us who were far from the buckets would often ease ourselves where we lie. Some of us slaves went mad. One woman was so mad as to be chained on the deck, but one man was flogged to death. As it appears, they thought he was malingering.
Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. A long way from home, a long way from home.
Death was a constant companion on the voyage. Reverend Newton, slaver, later turned abolitionist, observed that every morning, more instances than one is found of the living and the dead fastened together. There were diseases, smallpox, measles, gonorrhea, phyllis, dengue, malaria, dysentery, yaws, elephantitis, leprosy, which in some cases led to 50% mortality in a shipment. Then there were the outright murders by flogging and or walking the plank. The most famous case being that of the Zong, which jettisoned 133 slaves who were sick or weak so they could claim the insurance.
There were mutinies and suicides. For the record shows that Africans did not submit tamely to being carried across the Atlantic like chained beasts. The danger of mutinies was greatest when all the slaves on board belonged to one single tribe, especially one of the warlike tribes from the Gold Coast. In one of those mutinies, which failed, the captain of the Albion frigate, James Barbot Sr., made the mistake of providing the slaves with knives so that they could cut their meat. The slaves tore pieces of iron from the forecastle door, broke off their shackles, and killed the guards at the entrance to the hatchway. Before the mutiny was quelled, 28 slaves had either been shot dead or had drowned themselves overboard and thrown themselves overboard. Barbot did not make that mistake again.
If the weather was clear, we were brought on deck at 8 in the morning, men attached by their leg irons to the great chain that ran along the bulwarks.
The mutiny began at midnight. 2 men stayed sentry at the forehatch where he permitted 4 slaves to go up, but neglected to lay the gratings again as they should have done, whereupon 4 more Negroes came on deck, and all 8 fell upon the 2 sentries, who immediately called out for help. The Negroes attempted to get their cutlasses from them, but the lanyards had them fastened to the men's wrists, and they could not get them off before they came with men's aid, to the men's aid. The Negroes, perceiving several white men coming towards them with arms in their hands, quitted the sentries and jumped over the ship's side into the sea. There was one of 3 mutinies. Captain Snellgrave survived, and there detailed accounts of 55 mutinies from 1699 to 1845, and passing references of more than 100 others.
Suicide was another form of resistance. In a coffle of 73 slaves, as told by Mungo Park, the Scottish explorer, 2 of the slaves, a woman and a girl, ate clay in an effort to commit suicide. On the slave ship Hannibal, 12 Negroes drowned themselves and others starved themselves to death, for they believed that in death they would return to their native country. On the Elizabeth, 1 woman found some rope, yarn, and hung herself. On the Brooks, 1 man tried to cut his throat. When sewn up by the ship's surgeon, he tore out the sutures and tried to cut his own throat on the other side, using his nails as his instrument. His hands were tied together as he refused food. He died of hunger in 8 days. The slaves were tortured while threats of forcing them to swallow hot coals, which usually had the desired effect. But if they still refused to eat, they were flogged. As if flogging proved quite ineffective, they were forced with a speculum oris, or a mouth opener as we know it, and sometimes even that failed. When the Prince of Orange anchored in St. Kitts in 1737, more than 100 Negro men jumped overboard, and most of them died. And then there were those who died of fixed melancholy. Slaves who were well fed, treated well, and kept under relatively sanitary conditions would often die for no apparent cause, other than the loss of their will to simply live. Fixed melancholy was rife among the Ibu and the food-gathering tribes of the Gabon, but all the Negroes were capable of it.
Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. A long way from home. A long way from home.
But for those of them who made it to the other end, usually the last 2 or 3 days of the Middle Passage were a comparatively better period. If there was remaining provisions, the slaves were given bigger meal as to fatten them for the market, as much as water as they could drink. There were several fashions of selling slaves. In few instances, the cargo was consigned to a single planter, but most often there were auctions.
Ladies and gentlemen, step on up. This is the Friday of the New Market Slave Auction, where we bring you the finest of specimens. First up on the block is a Negro who goes by the name of Denmark, fresh from the Indies he come, well bred and seasoned for the field. Fine teeth, strong buck, looking to be about 49 years old. This nigga will make you a fine, mighty hand and give you many years labor. And if you breed him out, some fine looking niggas to build your stock. So starting $1 bid, $50 now. We'll give me 55, now 55, now 55, now 65, now 65, now 70. We'll give me 675, 75, now 75, now 80, now 80. $80 bid, $80 bid, now come. Some fine looking niggas, come on, folks, step on up. $80 now, give me now. Who will give me 90, 90, 90, 90, now 90, now 90. This nigga's real fit. Watch him dance. Now 90, now 90, 95, $95 bid, 95. Will he give me 100? 100 now 100. 100 now 100. Yeah, now 100. Will give me 110? 110, no 100. Give me 110. Going twice. Sold to the gentleman over there in the back half. There's a nigga, fine nigga, $100.
I saw slaves sold. I can see that old block now. At them sales, they would put a nigger on the scale and weigh him, and then the bidding would start. If he was young and strong, the bidding would start around $150, and the highest bidder got the nigger. A good young breeding oman brung $2,000 easy, because all the masters wanted plenty of strong, healthy children. The carpenters, bricklayers, and the blacksmiths brung fancy prices from $3,000 to $5,000. A nigger that warrant more than just a good field hand brings about $200. The slaves were put in stalls like pens they use for cattle. And there's a curtain, sometimes just a sheet, so the bidders can't see the stock too soon. The overseer standing just outside with black snake whip. Across the square, a little piece, there's a big platform with steps leading to it. Then they pull up the curtain and the bidders crowd around. Them in the back can't see, so the overseer drives the slaves out to the platform, and he tells the ages of the slaves and what they can do. He makes.
Hey, folk, come on up. Next up, we got Nancy. Nancy's a fine female slave, age 22. And as you see, she's of small style, but no matter her style, she can do all kind of housework. She washes, she's a fine ironer, she's a cook, she sews, she knits, she spins, and she is well recommended. She comes well recommended for her honesty, sobriety, and good temper. Now, folks, who will give me $250 for this honest nigger woman who's still young enough to perhaps give you some milk for your own babies when she ain't got her own? Okay, come on down. There's no, $200 coming on dollar bill, $200 dollar bill. Give me $250, come down, no. We'll give me $200, $200, give me dollar bill, give me $200.
I see these ancestors of ours, the merchants, the adventurers, the youngest sons of squares, leaving the city and the shores and the seaports, eager to establish a temporary home and make a fortune in the new lands beyond the west, pawning perhaps the old familiar acres or the assured competence, sturdy, realist, eager to wring the wealth from these Barbados and to build trade and colonize and pay homage to their king and worship according to the doctrines of the Church of England. I see these ancestors of ours, torn from the hills and dales of their motherland, weeping, hoping in mercy of time to return, to farm and holding, shuttle and loom to return, in snow or rain or shine, to humble homes their own, cursing the day they were cheated by rebel standards or betrayed for their country's honor, fearing the unknown land, the fever and the hurricane, the swamp and the jungle, all the travelers' tales. I see them, these ancestors of ours, children of the tribe, ignorant of their doom, innocent as cattle, bartered for, captured, beaten, penned, cattle of slave ship, less than cattle, sold in marketplace, yoked in servitude, cattle bruised and broken, but strong enough to plow and breed, and promise white man's heaven where they sing. Fill lamps with oil, nor wait the bridegroom's coming. Raise chorus voices in hymn of praise.
By the 17th century, Britain undoubtedly ruled the waves and was expanding their territories in the Americas, including the fair Indies. It was in 1605 that the English laid claim to Barbados, their first possessions in the Caribbean area. In 1655, the English took Jamaica from the Spanish. With the acquisition of the West Indies colonies and an unlimited supply of cheap labor, sugar could be produced by the ton and molasses by the hogshead. When the molasses was fermented and distilled, it became the potent beverage called rum, and the demand for rum was universal. Sugar has never been a little man's crop. Even then, to yield a profit, it had to be cultivated on a large scale. So sugar was king.
The succulent flower bleeds molasses as its slender sweet stalks bend, beheaded in the breeze. The green fields convulse golden sugar, tossing the rain aside, outgrowing the sun, and carving faces in the sun-sliced panorama. The reapers come at noon, riding the cutlass whip. Their saliva sweetens everything. In the boiling season, each stem is a flashing arrow, swift in the harvest. Cane is sweet, sweat, slain. Cane is labor, unrecognized, lost and uncovered. Sugar is sweet, swollen pain of the year. Sugar is slavery's immovable stain. Cane is water lying down and water standing up. Cane is a slaver. Cane is bitter, very bitter, in the sweet blood of life.
The plantation system spread across America's South, where they produced cotton, to the islands, beginning with those in the Leeward Chain, Antigua, St. Kitts, Nevis, Montserrat, to the South Americas, from Mexico to Argentina, where they worked in the mines, on the ranches, and on plantations. Slaves were regarded as work units, units of production. Birth and deaths were reckoned as profit and loss, and the expense of rearing children balanced against the cost of buying new Africans. Many planters frankly said it was cheaper to buy than breed. Slaves were kept in a state of terror. They were punished for far more potent reasons than simple cruelty or hope of gain. In the Caribbean, with the slave population far outnumbering the white, it was overawed by the white man's power.
My name is Mary Reynolds. Old man Solomon was the nigger driver. We were scared of Solomon and his whip. He didn't like us freckling around. He didn't like for us niggers to pray either. We never had no church, but us have praying in cabins, We sat on the floor and pray with our heads down low and sing low. But if Solomon heard, he'll say, I'll come in there and tear the hind off your back. Some of the old niggas tell us that we got to pray to God, that he don't think different of blacks and the whites. We used to pray for the day when niggas only be slaves of God. Praise for the end of tribulation and the end of beatings and shoes that fit our feet. What I hated most was when they would beat me and I didn't know what they beat me for. And I hated them stripping me naked as the day I was born.
When they go to whip a nigga, he made him strip to the waist. And he take a cat o' nine tails. And he bring the blister. And then he busts the blister with a wide strap of leather fastened to a stick handle. Many a time a nigga get beaten, blistered, and cut up so bad that we have to go get a sheet and grease it with lard and wrap him up in it. And they have to wear a greasy cloth wrapped around their body under that shirt for 3-4 days after they get a big whooping. My name is Katie Rowe.
My name is Thomas Cole. The slaves were woke up every morning at 4:30 by a slave blowing a horn. Breakfast is eat, and the man folks, they go to the fields. And as soon as the women them finish their housework and take care of the babies, they comes to work too. We all works till noon. Then we eats our dinner in the shade and rest about an hour and a half when it is very hot. We works till evening, between sundown and night, and we go back to we quarters and eat supper. And by night, we is all ready to go to bed and sleep. You was always tired when you make a day like that on the plantation.
There is just 2 classes to the white folks. Bakra slave owner and the poor white folks that didn't own no slave. There was more classes amongst the slaves. The first class was the house servants, butler, the maiden, and the cook. The next class was the carriage drivers, gardeners, carpenters, barber, and the stablemen. Then come the next class, the wheelwright them, blacksmith, and slave foreman. The next class was the cowmen and the niggers that take care of the dogs. The lowest class was the field niggers. My name is Rosa Stark.
The niggers used to sing to nearly everything he did. If he was happy, it made him happier. If he was sad, it made him feel better. The women sing as they bend over the washtub. The timber nigger sings as he cuts the logs. The mother sings as she rocks the baby. Singing is the nigger's most joy and the most comfort. When they needs all these things, they sing about the joys in the next world and in the trouble in this. In the cabin at night after supper, the slaves would sing. One song I remember was, "Am I born to die?" My name is Vinnie Brunson.
It took a smart nigga to know who his father was in slavery time. I never did know anything about my grandmamas and grandpapas. There wasn't many slaves that could tell you about them either. And plenty of them didn't know anything about their mothers and fathers. The plantation owners just sold and traded Negroes like the horse and cattle traders do now. My master owned 3 plantations and 300 slaves. He started out with 2 Oman slaves and raised 300 slaves. One was called Shorty Peggy and the other Long Peggy. Long Peggy had 25 children. It was against the law to learn a nigger to read and write in slavery time. White folk will chop your hands off for that quicker than they would for most anything else. That's just a saying, cause a nigger without hands would not be able to work much, and master would not be able to sell them for not as much as if he had good hands. They just beat him up bad when they get caught studying, reading. But some owners did cut off one finger every time they catch a slave trying to get a little learning. I was educated. I ain't educated in the books. I was educated by the licks I got.
Master Cole was a good man. He has respect for older people's feelings and treated his slaves like they was human beings instead of dumb brutes. He lowered his slaves more privileges than any other slaveholders around them parts. He tried to learn them how to make money and counts money. The way most of us learned to read was the Bible. One of the slaves would learn to read, and he would read the Bible to the rest of them who wants to listen. And then finally, another one wants to learn to read, and he would learn him a little. Some of the older slave owners would not allow it.
I was born at Brackish Pond in Bermuda on a farm belonging to Mr. Charles Miners. I was bought by Captain Darrell, who gave me to his daughter, Mrs. Williams. They named me Mary. I had scarcely reached my 12th year. Mrs. Williams became too poor, so she hired me out to Mrs. Pruden. Then Mrs. Williams died, and Mr. Williams sold me to a captain who lived in a Spanish point. This was my first and most miserable existence, for the mistress was a savage mistress to her slaves. She would strip me naked, hand me up by the wrist, and lay my flesh open with the cowskin. Was an ordinary punishment for even the slightest offense. For 5 years in this house, I met with the same treatment almost daily. Then the captain sold me to Mr. D, and I was transported to Turk's Island. I was immediately sent to work in the salt ponds with the other slaves. Though we worked from morning till night, there was no satisfying Mr. D. The captain used to beat us while raging and foaming with passion. But Mr. D was usually quite calm. You see, he would give orders for slaves to be whipped and assist in the punishment without even moving a muscle of his face, walking about and taking snuff with great composure. Nothing could touch his hard heart. I worked for about 10 years in Turk's Island when Mr. D retired to Bermuda and took me to wait on one of his daughters. Mr. D continued his dreadful ways, even beating his own daughter till she was black and blue. Ooh, I once saved her from being killed by him. Several years after Mr. John Wood was going to Antigua and purchased me for $300 or 100 pounds in Bermuda currency. During my first 3 years, I was flogged regularly. And once I was put in a cage. Once I went to one Mr. Adam White, a free black, and asked him, please buy me. He went directly to Mr. Wood that I was not to be sold. Mr. Wood was so vexed that the next day he whipped me something good. I made money taking in washing, selling coffee and yams to earn money to buy my freedom. Once I bought a hog on a ship and sold it for double on the shore, but he still wouldn't sell me. The Moravian ladies taught me to read. Yes, they did. Sometime after I began going to the Moravian church, where I met Daniel James, a free black man. We were married in 1826. But when Mr. Wood heard, he flogged me somewhat good with a horsewhip. My name is Mary Prince.
I am Melinda Discuss. Our master took his slaves to meeting with him. There was always something about that I couldn't understand. They treated the Negroes like animals and would not hesitate to separate and sell them. Yet, they seemed to think they had souls and tried to make Christians of them. We used to pray all the time for we freedom.
Yes, women were equal to men in slavery. As units of production, they were given equal punishment. One of the milder forms of punishment was the use of stocks. The hands and feet of the offender were fastened to a wooden frame and remained confined in this position for periods of 3 to 6 hours. For serious crimes, as running away, men and women alike were either shipped out of the country or were put to death. The only distinction is that pregnant women had their sentence suspended until after the birth of the child. The most frequent form of punishment was flogging, and 39 strokes was the maximum.
Why, oh, me no. Why, oh, me no, si Tyra. Why, oh, me no. Si Tyra, me mother, me brother, and me sister, buried down a riverside. Tyra, me mother, me brother and me sister, buried down a riverside. Why, oh, me no see Tyra, why?
Above green cane arrow is blue sky. Beneath green arrow is brown earth. Dark is the shroud of slavery. Over the river, over the forest, over the field. Aye, black as the skin. Aye, red as heart. As round it looked, over the world, over the forest, over the sun. In the dark earth, in cold dark earth, time plants seeds of anger. This is another world. But above is the same blue sky, the same sun. Below is the same deep heart of agony. Day passes like a long whip over the back of a slave. Day is burning whip, biting the neck of a slave. Night comes down from river like a thief. Night comes from deep forest in a boat of silence. Dark is the shroud of night over the river, over the forest. The slave staggers and falls. His face is on the earth. His drum is silent. Silent the night. Hollow the boat. Between the tides of sorrow, in the dark floor, in the cold, dark earth, time plants the seed of anger. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. So Moses went to Egypt land, let my people go. He made old Pharaoh understand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. Thus spoke the Lord, bold Moses said, let my people go. If not, I'll smite your firstborns dead. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go.
Resistance and rebellion was common. The first large one was the Hispaniola Revolt in 1522. Then when the British took over Jamaica from the Spanish in 1655, many of the Spaniards' slaves escaped to the hills and became Maroons. No doubt they were led by the Coromantins, slaves from the Gold Coast, which were highly regarded by the English and usually sold at a higher price than those of the other regions. They were called after the port of Coromantin. Coromantin was not an African tribal name. Most likely they were Fanti or the Ashanti people. No other group of slaves aroused so much controversy. They were often the leaders of slave mutinies. It is said that one slave uprising, 33 Coromantins murdered and wounded no less than 19 whites in a space of an hour. The Jamaica House of Assembly, in describing a series of revolts during the middle of the 18th century, reported, all of the disturbances have been planned and conducted by the Coromantin, Negroes who were distinguished from the rest thereby, their aversions to husbandry, and the martial ferocity of their dispositions.
The greatest revolts, except that for the Santo Domingo, took place in Jamaica and Guyana. Berbice exploded with revolts in 1762, 1763 to 64, and 1767. The rebellion is 1763 to 64 under Cuffee engulfed half the slaves in the colony. In the Demerara, there were revolts in 1772, 73, 74, and 75. Serious revolt also took place in 1803 and 1823. In the latter, thousands from 37 plantations had taken part. The other islands also had their share of ferment and unrest. In Barbados, in June 1675, after the house of a slave named Fortuna informed her master of plans for a slave revolt which aimed at killing all the whites and making a very old slave called Cuffee king of Barbados. The alleged leaders were arrested. 6 were sentenced to be burned alive. 11 others beheaded. One of those sentenced to be burned, a slave named Tony, said, "If you roast me today, you can't roast me tomorrow."
In 1686, a conspiracy was discovered among Irish servants and slaves back in Barbados. The Irish was disarmed, but the 20 slaves executed. Another slave conspiracy discovered in 1692 resulted in the execution of 92 slaves. In 1816, the last and only significant revolt led by African slave Bussa from Barbados, along with Jackie, King Wiltshire, Nanny Grigg, and others succeeded in holding out, but they were caught, and 214 slaves were executed.
In St. Vincent, the Black Caribs under the leaders Chatoya fought a 5-month war against the British, which resulted in a peace treaty and their extradition to Belize. In 1684, Antigua slaves took to the hills in the Southwest. One fugitive caught in 1687 had his tongue cut out and one of his legs chopped off to provide a living example to the rest. In 1736, a general uprising was frustrated by disclosure by one of the captors who was arrested on some other minor offense, but who confessed in his panic. The convicted were found guilty, 5 were broken on the wheel, 5 were gibbeted, and 77 were burned alive.
In Jamaica, there was Tacky's War, Black Wall of Whitehall, one of Tacky's supporters, Three Finger Jack, Plato the Wizard, and the Mutiny of Fort Augusta, and of course, Juan de Bolas, Cudjoe, Quaco of the Maroons. The Maroons managed to keep the English at bay and negotiate a peace treaty which guaranteed their freedom. Although it is the men of whom most tales are told, women were also part of the resistance. For the most part, they ran away, like the mother of Ellen Cragen.
I am Ellen Cragen. My mother, she didn't work in the field, but in the house. One day, she fell asleep at her chores. Her master's boy saw her and told his mother. His mother told him to take a whip and wear her out. He took a stick and beat my mother until she woke up. But she took a pole from the loom and nearly beat him to death with it. She said, "I'm gonna kill you. These black titties sucked you and then you come out here and beat me?" And when she left, he wasn't able to walk. And that was the last I seen of her. She left the plantation because she knew if she stayed, they'd kill her.
Women also resisted work by malingering. One female slave in Jamaica named Industry was brought to slave court for refusing to work and setting a bad example to other Negroes on the property by her contumacious conduct. She was sentenced to 2 weeks hard labor. Records show in Jamaica between 1819 and 1835, 150 of 311 slaves were appeared at court hearings before the slave court, and most of them involved women, guilty of violent conduct or the use of violent languages. And in Trinidad, between 1824 and 1826, nearly twice as many women as men were referred for cases of insolence and insubordination. 1,782 women as compared to only 941 men.
Women schemed to do damage in ways which could not be found out. Destruction of property by fire was a popular method. Poisoning was less frequent, was also tried, and one slave was sentenced to execution, but transported in 1817 to Jamaica for this crime. To be true, house slaves had often revealed plots to save the lives of their masters, like Fortuna in Barbados and Rebecca in Jamaica, 1798. But in the Jamaica, there were at least 2 instances of women being sentenced for execution or transportation for their part in revolts. Venus was one of the 11 convicted for a plot in 1745, and one Cuba slave to a Jewess who was known as the Queen of Kingston in 1760, who was eventually executed. And of course, there was Nanny, Queen of the Maroons.
Hey, Queen Nanny, not just Queen of the Maroons. Queen Nanny is the true Queen of Jamaica. Nobody know when Queen Nanny born, but she was a queen mother of the Ashanti Akan people. Her title was really Nana. That is how she come to be called Nanny. She and her brothers, or so they say, Kojo, Akompong, Kofi, and Kwaku. Well, no one know exactly how they reached Jamaica because they don't seem to find no record of their arrival. But tongue have it to say that she and they were sent by their ancestors to fight to free her brothers and sisters who were in the bonds of slavery. Well, they even have it to say that she was married to a man named Ajo and had no children of her own womb because truly everybody in her command was like her child. Queen Nanny was a healer, conjure woman who could communicate with the spirits of the unseen world, and thus she was able to instill confidence in her followers. Where Nanny Town was way up in the hills, and so she was able to do a lot of raiding, and it is said that she caused at least 1,000 slaves to escape over her lifetime. Now, there's only a narrow path leading up to Nanny Town. So when the British soldiers and other people tried to find Nanny Town, they could clearly be seen on approach. And as they usually had to advance in single file, they could be picked off one by Nanny's warriors. Yes, that is how the Maroons were able to survive, because Nanny was a military strategist, a master in guerrilla warfare, and she trained her Maroon warrior them in the art of camouflage. She would have covered the soldier them with branches and leaves and instruct them to stand still. Them practice to stand still without holding breath, and they would look like trees. And then the British, them marching them red coats and fire, would be completely unaware that they're surrounded by people because them think it's tree. And I saw them would have moved, the tree them would have moved, causing confusion. And the red coat would be surprised when the bush would come alive and they found themselves under attack from our warriors. Hey, hey. I am telling you, much of the success of the Maroons was under her leadership. One legend was that Nanny one time was able to even catch bullets with her hand, which in fact is a highly developed art form in some parts of Africa. And some people even had to say that she would even catch the bullet them in her backside and fart them out. What a story. Me no officer, but tongue have it to say that she placed a large cauldron on the corner of a narrow mountain pot, and the pot was seen to be boiling even though fire was underneath it. And then the British them would approach, look curiously inside, and fall in and just die. But some say in the pot was boiling some certain medicine herb that would have smoked them up and caused them to just fall unconscious, because she was a master herbalist. They even said at one time when the British was trying to starve her out by blocking the path down to the village, Nanny had a dream, and you wake up in the dream, she found some pumpkin seed, and she planted the pumpkin seed, and it bear, and it bear, and it bear, and it bear, so till that the people that was saved from starvation. And into that same dream, she had a dream that the British was going to try and smoke her out. So Nanny take time, start to build a new town called Moortown, and to start to move her people there. So in 1734, when Captain William, they call him Captain Sambo, was said to be trying to capture Nanny and went to destroy the village. When they arrived, there was no Nanny and no village. In fact, the story is told that in 1739, when Kodjo and them was trying to sign the peace treaty, Nanny decided that she wasn't signing no peace treaty because she was fierce to the bitter end. And having safely led her children to Moortown to start afresh, Nanny went to the white cliffs around the hills of Portland. And it is said that Nanny stretched her hand wide and she chanted a chant of liberation. And all they saw was when a blackbird rise up and fly with a great moving of the wings back home to Africa. Yes, yes, yes. Queen Nanny is not just Queen of the Maroons. Nanny is the true Queen of Jamaica.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. The interlocking French and Haitian Revolution, led by Toussaint Louverture, shattered the tranquility, such as it was, of the slave-holding regions where everywhere in the hemisphere, and generated irrational fear among the slaveholders. Emancipation was in the air. Emancipation to be fought for by the abolitionists on the one hand, and fire by the never-ceasing fight to be free on the part of the slaves. Abolitionists came from every walk of life, like Reverend Newton, a former slaver and author of the hymn, "How Sweet the Name of Jesus Sounds," who said, "Custom, example, and interest had blinded my eyes. I did it ignorantly. I should have been overwhelmed by distress and terror if I had known or even suspected I was acting wrongly."
Our tropic fruits nourished 'neath a torrid sky, with Britain's orchards mild and fertile by. Can England boast the anana nectar's taste? The Maori pear, a vegetable feast? The flavored melon, or the juicy lime? Or sugarcane, the pride of India's clime? Or milky apple, Venus to inspire? Or cooling tamarind, that fans the fire? Or can the midwinter pluck the summer's pride, when all your gardens glow one snowy void? Or can you sit yonder fairy stream, or orange boughs preclude the scalding beam?
And can the muse reflect her tear-stained eye, when blood attests even slaves for freedom die? On cruel gibbets, high disclosed they rest, and scarce on groan escapes one bloated breast. Here sable Caesars feel the Christian rod, there Afric's Plato's tortured hope a god, while jetting Brutus on his country sighs, and Sudicato with his freedom dies. Britain forbear, be mercy still your aim, as your faith unspotted be your fame. Tremendous pain, tremendous deeds inspire, and Hydra-like new martyrs rise from fire.
It was Thomas Clarkson whose conversion by divine intervention fueled his efforts and spurred his fight in the efforts and the courts of streets of London, along with Sharp, Josiah Wedgwood the potter, and other enthusiasts. Clarkson founded the Society of the Abolition of the Slave Trade in 1787, but it was not easy to let go of such a profitable business. Income from the slave trade was important, every element of it, with all the economic growth it had in the Europe, including Britain. And in the case of Britain, this was especially true in the cases of counties of Lancashire, Yorkshire, and the Midlands.
It must be remembered that in the 18th century, a man could exist on £6 a year and live comfortably on 30. An annual income of £100 enabled one to live luxuriously. The adjusted gross income of the Liverpool merchants from the 303,737 slaves they sold in the West Indies in 11 years was about £12.3 million, or an average of £1 million a year. During the same period, Liverpool slavers made 878 voyages to Guinea coast, each lasting an average of 9 to 10 months and yielding an average cash return of £14,000 per voyage.
The Guinea trade was three-cornered. It consisted of carrying Manchester goods to Africa, where they were exchanged for slaves, then carrying the slaves to the West Indies, where they were exchanged for cash or 3-year notes of hand-bearing 6% interest, then buying sugar, then coffee, indigo, and ginger to carry home. To sell, to buy Manchester goods and repeat that process over and over. Thus, Liverpool built on the slave trade. It became the largest port in the world. The slave trade quickened the tempo of the whole Industrial Revolution, and Liverpool made no secret of the source of its wealth. The town hall was covered with productions of elephant's teeth and blackamoors. Shop windows were full of handcuffs, leg irons, collars, and slave chains. Goldsmiths advertised silver locks and collars for blacks. That's Negroes' dogs. And a fashionable woman of the time did not appear in public without her monkey dressed in embroidery jacket and a little black boy wearing a turban and baggy slit pantaloons.
Times were flush in the Guinea coast and in Liverpool. Guinea, which was a coin minted in gold from West Africa by King Charles II to advertise the Company of Royal Adventurers of England trading to Africa, formed in 1663 by the Duke of York, was supposed to be equal to a pound shilling. But Guinea gold was so pure and so much in demand that at that time it was worth as much as 30 shillings before being finally fixed at 21 shillings. England's merchants had much to be thankful for in the sugarcane industry. The virtues of the cane must now be sung, the noblest plant of all Western Isles. What greater subject can employ my muse? Not India's aromatic groves, nor all. The treasures of her 100 mines can boast more important trade, or yield to man a nobler use. Here, muse, Your power exert. The subject now to utmost power demands, to trace the cane through all its various toils, to full perfection crowns its use complete, but now your task to celebrate at large. With the sugar trade valued at 6 million pounds, opposition to slavery was political suicide. Enter William Wilberforce, son of a rich merchant and a parliamentarian. It would take 20 years before the slave trade was made illegal, 1807. The last ship to carry a legal cargo of slaves was the Kitty's Amelia of Liverpool. And ensuing death throes of slavery, many more slaves were transported illegally across the sea. After all, a slave bought in Guinea for $50, sold in Havana for $357 a piece, representing a profit of more than 500%.
It would take another 25 years, and incidents such as the Sam Sharp Rebellion in Jamaica in 1831 through 1832, in which some 20,000 slaves were involved to serve as a reminder that the slaves were impatient for their freedom. One being led to execution, Sam Sharp echoed the sentiments of the Negroes. Thus, I would rather die upon yonder gallows than live in slavery.
They hang him on Clement morning swung, between the falling sunlight and the women's breathing, like a black apostrophe to pain. All morning, while the children hushed their hopscotch joy, and Cain kept growing, he hung there sweet and low. At least that's how they tell it. It was long ago, and what can we recall of a dead slave or two, except when they punctuated our island tale? They swing like sighs across the brutal sentences, and anger pauses till they pass away.
In 1833, Parliament passed the Emancipation Act, which abolished slavery in all Britain colonies, effective August 1st, 1834. This legislation freed immediately only children under the age of 6. The others were required to continue working for their former owners. Field workers for an apprenticeship of 6 years, all others for 4 years. They were to work without pay for 3/4 of the working week, though they might be saving the wages made in that quarter for which they were paid to eventually buy their freedom. The apprentice system was so abused that it was forced to end 2 years early in 1838. Thus, on August 1st, 1838, 78 years after Tacky's rebellion in 1760, and almost 160 years after the outbreak on Captain Duck's plantation in 1678, some 400 years after the slave ships sailed across the Atlantic, freedom dawned under Britain's jewels in the Caribbean Sea.
John Crow say him na walk on Sunday, na walk on Sunday. John Crow say him na walk on Sunday, na walk on Sunday. Think I lie me tell, kill your maga come. Think I lie me tell, kill your maga come. John Crow say him na walk on Sunday, na walk on Sunday.
It would take several more years and many more brutal deaths before slavery would gasp its last breath in the Americas. 1863 in the United States of America, 20 years later, 1888 in Brazil. 500 years of this desecration of humankind. The desecrated now become sacred as we honor their living and their dying. We, the children of survivors, must listen to their voice prints. Listen.
Listen to the voices of our ancestors calling out our names. Listen. We hear the voices echoing in our bellies, echoing in our blood, echoing in our skin, echoing in our bones, echoing in the wind, whispering words of encouragement, shouting words of praise, singing songs of faith, calling us to courage. Listen, and we will hear the voices giving birth to our vision of a new day.
I come from nigger yard of yesterday, leaping from the oppressor's hate and the scorn of myself, from the agony of the dark hut in the shadow of the hurt of things, from the long days of cruelty and the long nights of pain, down to the wide streets of tomorrow, of the next day leaping I come, who cannot see will hear.
And there was always sad music somewhere in the land, like a bugle and a drum between the houses. Voices of women singing far away, pauses of silence, then a flood of sound. But these were things like ghosts or spirit of the wind. It was only a big world spinning outside, and men born in agony, torn in torture, twisted and broken like a leaf, and the uncomfortable morning, the beds of hunger stained and sorted like the world, big and cruel, spinning outside.
I come from nigger yard of yesterday, leaping from the oppressor's hate, the scorn of myself. I come to a world with scars on my soul, wounds on my body, fury in my hands. I turn to the histories of men and the lives of the peoples. I examine the shower of sparks, the wealth of the dreams. I am pleased with the glories and sad with the sorrows, rich with the riches, poor with the loss. From the nigger yard of yesterday, I come with my burden to the world of tomorrow. Turn with my strength.
You are involved. This I have learned. Today a speck, tomorrow a hero. Hero or monster, you are consumed.
Like a jig shakes the loom, like a web is spun the pattern. All are involved, all are consumed. If we must die, let it not be like hogs.
If we must die, oh, let us nobly die.
All pirates, yes, they rob by, so like to the merchant ship. Minutes after they took land from the bottomless pit. But my hand was made strong by the hands of the Almighty. We forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever heard, redemption song. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves shall free our mind. Have no fear for atomic energy. None of them will stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. We've got to fulfill the book. So won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? 'Cause all I ever heard, redemption song. These songs of freedom. 'Cause all I ever heard, redemption song. Redemption song.
Today, as we remember, from the granddaughter of a man that left the shores of Trinidad and Tobago on a banana boat, out of the huts of history's shame, I rise, up from a past that's rooted in pain. I rise. I'm a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise into a daybreak that's wondrously clear. I rise, bringing the gifts that my the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. Job's tale, voice prints of our ancestors. The actors, we say thank you. Played by Ellen Craig, played by Ashley Brittany. Mary, played by Sabrina Sumra Kelly as they take their bows. Mary Reynolds, played by Samantha Samuels. Katie Rowe, played by Rhonda Rosolo Solomon. Rosa Starks, played by Camille Fitzsimmons. And our songstress, Marge Patrick. Melinda Discus, played by Khadijah Glasgow Spare. Mary Prince, played by Chris Scott. And our kings, Job, played by David Patrick. Gustav Voss and Thomas Cole, played by A.C. Scott. Captain Phillips, played by Jason Thomas. The Anonymous and the Slaver's Accounts, played by Austin Thompson and Benny Brunson. And the Slave, played by Garth Henton. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce you to the storyteller, the visionary behind this project, Dr. Claire. As Dr. Nelson gets ready to come on behalf of the president and the vice president of CHE, we say thank you. This has been a reflection as we commemorate emancipation throughout the Caribbean in a means to educate, remember, reflect, and share the stories of our ancestors. Dr. Nelson.
Friends, we just thank you. 1638, how far are we? I just want to say thank you again to Caribbean Association of Georgia for once again coming to the fore. This is a very important moment in our history as both the Caribbean governments and people of African descent here in America work towards this construct of reparations. It's important that we explore what exactly it is went on as we see the fight for teaching the history of slavery, as we see the fight for teaching what they say on distorted history. It is up to us to spread the word. Please, if you're seeing this, share the tape with your friends, share the Facebook page. And if you are a teacher and would like a copy of the script to use with your schools, please feel free to reach out to us at the Caribbean Association of Georgia for a copy of the script, or to myself, Dr. Karen Nelson. We are pleased to share this information with you and the script with you, that you can use it in your own classrooms and in the churches, wherever you gather, because nothing we have said has been something that we have constructed of our own mind. This is indeed the voice print of our ancestors. We thank you. We continue to raise their voices, lest we forget. Amen.